Hey there, and welcome to the next video in the Intro to Web Dev course series of videos. Before I get started, I'm going to awkwardly just say that there's a chainsaw like 16 feet away from my face. I don't really know what they're doing out there, but it's super noisy, and I hope you can't really hear it. But if you hear some noises in the background, it's because my apartment complex does not leave trees alone, and it's super annoying. So hopefully that doesn't bother you, but it's definitely going to annoy me. Anyway, so in the last video, we learned about the fetch function, which lets you get content or data from other URLs and use that data in your own code and add it to your own page and stuff. So we saw a few examples like getting random messages and parsing that JSON to get a message and show that in our page. And that's all good, but that's only so useful. You're still just working with your own content, and honestly, you probably don't need fetch for that kind of thing. But where fetch becomes really powerful is the idea of APIs, or API. I'm going to kind of mumble that word probably. And that's what this video is about. This video is about APIs. So before I get into like the details of how to do that stuff, I'll say that API stands for Application Programmer Interface, I think. Maybe not. API coding, whatever. This is really annoying. Yeah, application programming interface. And it's just kind of a generic term that covers a lot of different things. So for example, you've already used a form of APIs. Every time that you use a function in JavaScript, you are using the JavaScript API. So if you've used like document.getElementById or like the inner HTML variable, that is sort of the DOM API. That is the set of rules that you can use, the set of like functions and variables that you can use to get, to accomplish your goals. And now there's a giant truck outside my window. Beautiful. Or like when we used P5.js, the P5 reference is itself an API because it's a list of rules that you can use to accomplish your goal. So that's the general term API. It really just means the set of things you can do in a language or in a library or in a part of the language. But most of the time when people use the word API, especially if they're talking about web development and JavaScript and HTML, they really mean a specific kind of API. They mean a REST API or a RESTful API. And REST stands for, I don't even remember, representational state transfer. I wrote it down over there. You can't see that, but representational state transfer. That's REST. And really, that's just a fancy way to say that there's a way to work with data through URLs. And I could get into like the complicated, like how it all works in the background and all that stuff, but honestly, I don't think you need to worry too much about it. As long as you know that a REST API is a way to work with data through URLs, I think that's good enough for our purposes. And that's kind of a fancy way, like representational state transfer. It's kind of a complicated name for something that, I'm not going to say it's not complicated, but really what it means is you can use URLs to work with data. So I'm going to jump kind of right into it, actually. Let's say I'm looking at Wikipedia and I'm looking at the cat article. Here it is. I can learn all about their meowing, purring, growling, all that good stuff. This page has pictures on it, has links on it. It's got, categories and stuff. And this is cool, but let's say I wanted to work with this data and, I don't work for Wikipedia. I don't have access to their underlying code, but Wikipedia has an API, which means I can use its API to get to its data. Specifically, it has a RESTful API, but really what that means is I can go to a special URL, and I'll talk about how I figured out this URL in a minute, but I can go to a special URL that gives me this data. And here we go. I'll just go straight to it, I guess. So don't worry about how ugly this is. This is not designed for human beings to read, but I'll just point out a few things. One is it's just a URL. It's just a web page. There's nothing fancy going on. There's no like complicated like concepts that you don't already know about. This is a file on the internet. I mean, it's not literally a file, but you know what I mean. It's a URL that you can visit in your browser and look at. You probably wouldn't want to look at it because it's not designed for humans to read, but it's just a URL out there on the internet. Sorry, I'm looking at the set of things that I wanted to talk about. I'm already way off of my plan. Whatever, we'll do it live. So this is just a page on the internet. And the other thing I want to point out is that it's JSON. And we talked about JSON in the fetch tutorial, in the fetch video. But this is JSON. This is JavaScript object notation, and you can see like it's got curly brackets and colons and all that good stuff. And let me go to let me just make a duplicate of this tab. So I'm just opening it up in a new tab, same thing. And I'm going to take out this format equals JSON part of the URL just to get a different kind of view of it. So this is the same thing. It's just a URL. It's just a URL on the internet. And this is, again, I'll talk about where I got these URLs from, but this is the same exact data, just formatted a little bit easier for humans to read. So if we look at this, we can see that the content itself is JSON. You have your curly bracket, which means that this is an object. You've got your properties, which are names and then values. So the object contains a parse field, which itself points to an object. And that object has many fields. The first one is title. Title is cat, page ID, rev ID, revision ID probably. Text, which is the full text of the entire article. So it's pretty long, and that's one of the reasons it's kind of difficult to read. Just because this is like unformatted HTML. It's not like, there's no tabs or spaces or new lines in it. It's just raw HTML. So I'm going to maybe just scroll past that. It's just a huge block of text, and again, this is not designed for humans to read, and it's got like CSS and stuff inside of it too. So it's just a big blob of text. But this is data that the API or the URL is giving you. So all right, I'm finally through the text value, which again is just the entire text of the whole article. And now I have a new field, which was in that object, lang links, which itself is an array. That array contains objects. Those objects contain fields, and so on. And this is all, this shouldn't be too shocking. If you watched the last video, if you read through the last tutorial on fetch, this is JSON. And you can scroll through it more to see like what other kinds of fields are in the JSON. I think I already passed one. Let me go back up a little bit. And here, okay, so this was, I scrolled too far. Okay, so that was lang links, I guess, which are, it looks like the links to the same article in different languages. So, I don't know exactly what these languages are. This is, I think, Chinese. Yeah, so, whatever. You can get to other languages from this article, which I don't even know if that's visible in actual Wikipedia. Probably is somewhere. I guess over here. anyway, so that was the language links, and here's categories. So you get a bunch of an array of objects which give you like the categories of this article. So here's like domesticated animals. Cat is a domesticated animal. Well, I don't know. Debatably, if you ask a cat, I think it would say it's not, but whatever. And you've got different articles, mammals described in 1758, cosmopolitan vertebrates, you know, whatever, a bunch of different articles that, or categories that apply to this article. So it's just, you know, data that Wikipedia uses behind the scenes that now you have access to yourself, and you can sort of use this in your own code. So, all right, before I dive into actually using this, what I'm going to do is maybe talk about like how I figured out this URL in the first place. And the honest answer is I don't remember. I kind of stole this code from myself after I figured it out, but let me kind of retrace my steps. So I think what I would have done, I think there's a few ways to do it. One, I think if I scroll all the way to the bottom, Wikipedia has this developers link. And then, you know, I can read through this, and I'm pretty sure that on here, web APIs. So if I think to myself, like, if I'm just, you know, thinking about a project that I want to do, and maybe I want access to a certain site's data, whether that's Wikipedia or, you know, other sites, I might look for this kind of link, developers or API or, you know, something like that, either on the bottom or in the left nav or somewhere. And that will generally take you to more information about how to work with that data. And web APIs generally is what I'm looking for. If you're working in JavaScript, you're generally going to use a web API. And yeah, okay, you could get more information this way and, you know, read more about it and all that good stuff. And, you know, this is the same idea that we've seen many times in this series or in this course, where you read the documentation, try something out, and see what happens. And that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is just to straight up search for it, Wikipedia API. And, you know, you'll get a bunch of different links. This is funny. This is the Wikipedia article on APIs, which is not exactly what I was looking for, but actually it was what I was looking for earlier. So here it is, application programming interface, but I don't want the Wikipedia article on APIs. I want the API for Wikipedia, so that's not right. You know, here's some other tutorials, but I think this one might be right, or maybe this one. I don't know. We'll find out. Okay, maybe not. Maybe this one. Okay, this is the Wikipedia article on web APIs. Fine. What happens if we go there? All right, so that's some kind of redirect. I don't know. It's a Wikipedia thing. But here we go. I think this is where I started. This is like the home page of the Wikipedia API and English Wikipedia API. You know, since I mostly speak English, barely, this is probably what I want. So I'm going to click there. And here we go. This is now getting into kind of the details of the things you can do. And, you know, you can read more about it. Like, you know, some of these, in fact, probably most of these require you to be logged in. So like, I don't think you can just block a user willy-nilly. I think you have to log into an account first and all that stuff. But just for the sake of, you know, working with the data itself, what I'd look for is something that lets me like get the data. So in this case, we want the parse, I don't know even what to call this, like function or endpoint action, I guess they call it. And so I'm going to click on that and get more information and, you know, read more about the kinds of parameters that it takes, which if I go back to my URL, like here's the parameters, format, version, format, blah, 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 blah. You know, and that's how I pieced it together. And down at the very bottom, I think, there are examples. So documentation, you know, good documentation, I think, has examples of it in action. So I can click on this. And this takes me to, you know, to a page that shows the output of the API endpoint, or the URL. Endpoint is just another word for URL. And this is for an example article, and I could maybe change this to what I was looking at. And yeah, there you go. So you're kind of back to where I started, like after having figured out the URL, but it wasn't through any magic information that was in my brain ahead of time. I straight up like looked for it and played around until I got to something like this. So anyway, like if you are working with your own API, I recommend going through that kind of process where you read through the documentation, you use your favorite search engine to find more information, more documentation, read through it, try stuff out until you get to something that looks, kind of like this, JSON. And then you can read through it and test it out. But okay, all right, I'm going to come back, and so now we know sort of how I got the URL in the first place. So let's actually use it. Okay, so what I have is, well, nothing really. I have a replit that I've created, and this is just a blank kind of empty replit. I have an index.html, and again, like I'm using replit just for the sake of using it, but you can do the exact same thing from local files if you're using like your own editor. It shouldn't matter. The same code will work. I'm just using a different environment, honestly, just to show it off. But what I have right now is index.html, which contains just some placeholder text, and it loads script.js, which is currently empty. So I haven't really started anything yet. So to get started, maybe I'll have an onload function. Maybe I'll call it load article. And then I'll go over to script.js and define that function, load article. And it's not going to take any parameters, so okay. And I'll say console.log hello, just to test that I have everything working. Maybe I'll make my console move up here so you can see it behind my dumb face. All right, let's run this. And there we go. I see hello, which kind of proves to me that my HTML is connected to my JavaScript. And so what am I going to do next? So I have this URL, which gives me JSON data about the cat article. So it gives me this underlying data. And I don't really have an end goal in mind. I just want to kind of play around and work with the underlying data and come up with something. So I know for a fact that what I want to do is fetch this data. I'm going to do that first, no matter what my end goal is. So I'm going to maybe start with that. So like I talked about in the previous video, there are a bunch of different ways to use fetch, and if you want to brush up on that, you can go back here. So I could use callback functions or promise chaining or anonymous functions or arrow functions or async and await. If we were in person or whatever, I would probably ask for people to vote, but for me, maybe I'll just do async and await. I think that's kind of the shortest path. So I'm going to have the async keyword up here to make this whole function asynchronous, and then I'm going to use the await keyword. So I'm going to say response equals fetch, and then I have my URL. Maybe I will put that in a variable just to make it a little easier to read. So let URL equals string of the URL, and nothing too fancy. It's just a string. It's just a string that contains the URL, and then I'm going to say URL. Okay, so I'm fetching the URL, and I get the response back, and then I'm going to say let, I don't know, what is this thing called? So the whole thing is an object, and I could call it like response object, I guess. I don't know, we'll just do that for now. Object equals response.json. So I'm now converting the response into the objects that the JSON represents. So I'm taking the response, which itself is JSON, and I am calling the JSON function on it to convert that JSON into objects that I can use in JavaScript. And then just to get something working, what I will do is, maybe I'll just print it out for now. Console.log response object. And I don't expect this to really be anything worth presenting, but I just want to make sure that I don't get any errors, that nothing breaks. So let's run this and see what happens. And I do not see the response print it out, and oh, that is because I forgot to await. Here you go. Await, so that wasn't actually done yet. It's a little suspicious that's how that worked. Do I have any errors somewhere else? No. Okay, weird. Okay, I don't know, it's just blank, whatever. Let me try it again after adding in the await keywords. Run. And there we go. Okay, so I've console.logged the response object, which is just this really gross, like, again, not really designed for humans to look at format, but what this shows me is that I have it in my data and I can start using it. So that's good. So let me go back to what this thing looks like. Maybe I don't know, I could talk about like how to get more information, but really it's using search engines and reading through the API. So maybe I'll do like Wikipedia API parse. And maybe this parsing wiki text, is this what I want? Maybe. So this walks me through some of the parameters that I can use, some of the properties that the response contains. So, you know, we saw text earlier, lang links, categories. Was title one of them? I don't remember. So generally what I use is a combination of looking at the sort of documentation for the API response and the response itself. So I'll go back to this kind of nicely formatted one. Yeah, so I've got, I can just look at this to see what it looks like, to see what it contains. So I've got an object. That object contains a parse object, and that object, the parse object, contains title, page ID, rev ID. Okay, so let me try that. Parse and then title are the things I'm going to try to remember. So let title equals response object dot parse dot title, right? And then maybe I'll log that and I'll run that. So now instead of seeing that big blob, I'll just see one part of that big blob, the title. And I honestly, the rest of it is applying that same process over and over again. So maybe instead of console.log, maybe what I'll do is I'll replace this content with some HTML that I can play with. So let create a h1 element with an ID of, I don't know, title. And for starting out, I'll say loading maybe. And then I'll close it out. And okay, so I've got an h1 element or tag in my HTML with an ID of title, and it just starts out with loading. And then in my JavaScript, I'm going to say let title element equals document dot get element by ID. What did I call it? Title. And then title element dot inner text equals title. Okay, maybe I'll get rid of that console.log for now. And I always get annoyed by the lack of horizontal white space. Good enough, I guess. Let me just see this, run this and see what happens. So I'm going to run it and like pay attention over here to see like what happens when I run it. So I'm going to run it. And at first you see loading dot dot dot, and then a second later cat appears. And this gets at like the asynchronous nature of fetch. So the page is loaded, and by default, I say loading dot dot dot, and the page loads that and shows loading dot 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 in the page. And when it's loaded, the load article function is called, and because it's asynchronous, it kind of runs in the background, and it fetches the URL, which takes, you know, some amount of time. I've got pretty good internet here, so it doesn't take super long, but, you know, long enough that you can kind of see it. And then I do all the rest, where in the end, I modify the element to show the title of the article instead. But that means that you kind of see it in the page itself. You see loading dot dot dot. So again, like pay attention over here in the preview window over there. So you see loading, and then you see it changed to cat. So that's kind of how the asynchronous nature fits into it. And I could keep going. I could keep playing with the response that I get. Maybe I'll go back to those lang links. I think it was called lang links. Yeah, okay. So I'm not actually sure if that's in parse or if that's in something else, but let me just try it. Let lang links equals response object dot parse dot, and it's called lang links. Weirdly enough, it's not camel case, doesn't have a capital L, so all lowercase. Okay, lang links, and it looks like this is an array of objects. Okay, so just to test this out, I'll say console.log lang links. I did capitalize it, so I've got to double check that. And let's just see what this does. Test this out. And okay, I've got some objects, and this might be a little easier to look at in my console because now I'm only looking at one part of it. I don't have to go over here and like read the whole thing. Kind of up to you what you think is easier to work with. And it looks like each object contains like lang, URL, lang name. Okay, so now I could, like I said, I didn't have a plan going into this, so I'm just going to kind of play around. Maybe I'll loop over the lang links. So for let link of lang links, a few ways to do this in for loops. I could have done for let I equals 0, I is less than lang links dot length I plus plus, but this will work, and I don't think I need the index. And what do I want to do? Maybe for now I'll just print it out. Console.log link dot what? Maybe I'll say title, and I'll get rid of this. So like the thing I want you to maybe take away is that I'm not coding everything all at once. I'm just working really slowly. I'm working one line at a time, like taking apart one part of the response at a time and making sure that I really understand the format of it before I code the whole thing up. So I'm going to run this, and okay, cool. So I see a big list of titles of articles. I guess this is just cat in a bunch of different languages. That's kind of cool. And maybe okay, maybe what I'll do is I'll have a list element, and I'll say ULID equals, I don't know, lang links, and I'll just make it blank for now. And then back in my JavaScript, how do I want to do this? I think what I'll do is build a UL for each link, and then have it like link to the other language articles. Yeah. So how do I want to do that? Maybe I'll get the UL element up here. So I'll say title. Or, sorry, I'm just copy pasting. Let's links element equals document get element by ID lang links, I think I called it. And again, the white space is driving me nuts, but okay. And now that I have that, what do I want to do? I want to maybe append a child here. So a few ways to do that, but for now, maybe I'll just say links element dot inner HTML. I always forget if this is capitalized or not. Let me look that up real quick. JavaScript inner HTML. I don't remember. Inner HTML. All right, looks like it is capitalized. Okay, inner HTML, and I'm going to say plus equals, so append some HTML to it. So maybe I'll say link HTML here, and I'll have a variable let link HTML equals, and it's going to be an li. So I'm going to build an li here. There's a few ways I could have done this. It doesn't really matter as long as it kind of makes sense to you. So I'd go with whatever approach you prefer. The other way to do this might be to call document.createElement. Actually, maybe I'll do it that way. Link element equals document.createElement, and I'll create an li. All right, so this gives me an object that I can work with, which might be a little better. Link element dot, and I'll say inner text equals link dot title, and instead of adding link HTML, I'll say link element dot append child link element. So maybe this is unfortunate naming, but this is links element plural. This is link element singular. So links element contains link elements. Something like that. So that was kind of a lot of code to write without testing it, honestly, but let's run this and see what happens. And okay, I do have something. I do have the the links, the titles of the pages in my web page here, and that's progress. That's pretty cool. I like that. But you know, it's not quite done because these are supposed to be, oh, these are just LIs. So yeah, okay, maybe that's all I want. Yeah, all right, and maybe I'm happy with that. I was originally thinking maybe I would link to the actual page because these are actually links. I don't know if it matters. You know, it's kind of personal preference, honestly. So maybe I'll do one more link, a element. So this is actually not a link. This is an li. So I'm going to change that a little bit. Li, and then I'll have an a element equals document create element of a, and here's where I'll say a element dot inner text, and then a element dot what, href, I think. A element dot href equals link dot what. And so for that, I'm going to go back to the sort of response, and oh, it's just URL. Okay, I think that works. Link dot URL, and then I'm going to say li element dot append child a element, and then I'm done. So I'm just building out the HTML content in JavaScript, and then adding that HTML stuff, or that HTML content, to my page using DOM manipulation or interactive HTML, which we learned about like way back in week 3, 4, something like that, many weeks ago at this point. So, you know, this is what I meant by the first half of the course being the fundamentals, because you use it all the time. Anyway, I'm going to just run this and see what breaks. And shockingly enough, I don't think anything broke. So now I have a web page which contains a list of Wikipedia articles in a bunch of different languages for cat. So I can go to, I don't know what most of these languages are, so I'm going to maybe show my ignorance a little bit, but let me open this up. And here we go. Oh, it's an RTL language too. Cool. I wonder what this is. So if I go to translate, detect language, what does it end up being? English, not English. What are you talking about? All right. At this point, this has nothing to do with the actual course. I'm just curious what language that was. It's not English. What are you talking about? That's funny. Okay, even Google Translate doesn't actually know what language this is. If you know what language this is, please tell me. I know that it's an RTL language because, like, look at the layout. So it might be like, I don't know, I don't want to say Hebrew, but like could be Hebrew or, you know, some other RTL language. Blanking, but and it looks like, you know, this article is relatively short, I guess, because it hasn't actually been translated into this language. So, you know, but it's interesting. I think it's interesting that, you know, what I was able to do using the fetch function and the Wikipedia API was take the content or the data, the underlying data that is in this page that Wikipedia uses, and do my own thing with it. And that's kind of the beginning of the power of the fetch function and of APIs. It kind of opens up the door to, like, you are no longer, you know, you're not bound to writing all of the content yourself, or you're not bound to it being static content. You can now rely on data from various sources, and that's, you know, it opens up a lot of really cool options. The last thing I'll maybe demonstrate is, you know, I haven't touched the CSS yet, but nothing is stopping me from doing that. So just to get something working, maybe I'll change all my A tags to have color, I don't know, red. Maybe I'll make it really big, font size 24 pixels. I'll save that and run it. And, you know, now I have all of my links are red. And you can do the exact same things you can do in previous weeks with the fetch function and with APIs. You can use classes and ID selectors and all that good stuff. So don't feel like you're limited to bare bones HTML. The full power of CSS is still at your disposal, even if you're using data that comes from other sources. Okay, I think that's about as far as I am going to go with APIs. Maybe the last thing I'll mention is I specifically used the Wikipedia API in this example, just because A, I'm familiar with it, and B, I think it's a good example that most folks have already seen. Like, most folks have seen Wikipedia before, so it's kind of a logical starting point. I can say, hey, look at this article, and now here's the data behind it. But there are a ton of APIs out there, a ton of REST APIs out there. I didn't plan this part ahead of time, so we'll see how this goes. But I don't know, like, let's say you want to use the underlying data of Twitter. So what I would do is do a search for like Twitter REST API. I don't know if it has one, and go through the results, and all right, Twitter API documentation. That seems like a promising starting point. It's developer.twitter.com. Seems legit. And yeah, okay, it does look like it does have an API. So maybe I'll say make your first request and go through that. Oh my goodness, fine. And yeah, here you go, like search tweets. Maybe I want to search a tweet, for example, and it's going to walk through the things you need to do to set it up. Like the Wikipedia API is nice because you don't have to log in to use it, but some APIs you do have to log in to use it. I don't know if Twitter is one of them. Okay, it looks like you need like a developer account and stuff, but like you can run through these these setup steps, and man, all I want is to get to like a URL. Here, yeah. So here is a URL. I don't know if this is going to actually work. Probably not without doing some of that setup stuff, but I don't know. Let's just see what happens. Recent query from Twitter dev. Yeah, maybe. No, okay. Yeah, fine. This is yelling at me because I haven't actually logged in, and so whatever. But the idea is the same. You start by searching fill in the blank REST API and reading through documentation, trying things out, and like here's what it would look like if I had actually logged in. And it's JSON data that has objects and fields and arrays and all that stuff that you've already seen. And you could do the exact same thing that I did in this video, but instead of using the Wikipedia API, you can use the Twitter API or fill in the blank API. So I don't know, maybe like cat REST API. I don't know, I'm just being dumb. Like, yeah, here we are. There's a bunch of kind of jokey APIs that you can use as well. So the cat API looks like you can get pictures of cats and whatever. It's kind of goofy, but it works. And there's documentation that shows you how to use the endpoints, and it's all based on URLs that you can call using the fetch function and then work with in your own JavaScript. So I don't know, what does this give me? This gives me, so this URL gives me a random picture of a cat, and here's the URL. And I didn't have to write any of that code. I didn't have to write code that comes up with a random cat image. I found a API that does it for me. So this is kind of really similar to the idea of libraries, where a library lets you bring in code that other people wrote. APIs are very similar in that they let you bring in sort of data that other people are generating. It's a little more involved in that behind the scenes, but at a high level, I think that covers it pretty well for our purposes. So yeah, I want you to take away like not the fact that you can use the Wikipedia API, but more importantly than that, you can use any API. So whatever data you think is interesting, whatever website you think is interesting, see if there's an API for that data and see what you can do to play around with it. And the underlying concepts that you're going to use are going to be very similar. You're going to call the fetch function with a URL. You're going to parse that response, whether it's JSON or HTML or just raw text or whatever. And then you're going to work with that response in your JavaScript, very similar to how I did it here. So, okay, all right. I think that's as far as I'm going to go with this video. We've covered, a use of the fetch function using a specific API, but really it's more general than that. So I hope you take away the more general impact of it and, come up with something cool. All right, I think I'm going to leave it there. So I'll say, as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.